Most Americans remember or have learned about the horrifying events of September 11th, 2001. The imagery of people jumping out of skyscraper windows to their deaths is something cemented in our brains. However, many people are not familiar with the similar imagery of workers jumping to their deaths amidst a fire in New York City in the early 20th century at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. This tragedy was not caused by terrorism, but by terrible working conditions and lack of safety standards. Throughout history, it has taken tragedy for change and action to occur. In the case of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, it is important to understand the historical impact it had on the future of workers' rights. It is also important to remember the women who lost their lives that day so that future workers could enjoy a better and safer life. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire stands as a tragic but necessary moment in the struggle for workers' rights. In the years leading up to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, there was a boom in immigration and industry growth, much of it inside New York City. Factories were packed tight into buildings that would have been considered skyscrapers at the time. The workers of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in Manhattan consisted mostly of young immigrant women and girls who worked shoulder to shoulder on the 8th and 9th floors. In her article, The Politics of Mourning, the Triangle Fire and Political Belonging, Heather Poole wrote that working conditions were so poor and the hours were so long that there had been a worker strike over the previous 2 years that was, quote, at the heart of a bitter struggle over labor rights. This means there were already wary eyes on the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory before tragedy struck. The strike ended with the workers receiving more competitive wages. However, it did nothing to improve the safety standards of the workplace, and the company was still non-union. The horrible conditions within factories were no secret. Seeing as these densely populated areas, such as New York City, were cramming full-scale factories into a couple floors of a single building, tragedy was almost inevitable. The strike also affected how the female workers were treated. The doors were frequently locked at the end of the day so that management could search the workers. This would come into play on the day of the tragic fire, since the main crux of the danger was that the door leading to the stairwell had been apparently locked. After recent strikes, factory owners took steps to separate workers who spoke the same language or those who might find common ground. This was a concentrated effort to keep the workers divided. Some factory supervisors would even discipline the female workers for simply speaking to each other. These growing tensions were the fuse that set the stage for the fire. On March 25, 1911, a fire broke out on the 9th floor of the factory. Most experts seem to think a lit cigarette was the initial reason for the blaze. Regardless of the cause, the fire spread very quickly and panic ensued. As the workers tried to flee, they overwhelmed the interior fire escape and eventually the only working elevator as well. On top of this, the workers found the door to the stairwell locked when they tried to flee from the 9th floor. The firemen who arrived on the scene were not equipped with hoses capable of reaching the 9th floor. Seeing no way out, many of the workers jumped from the towering windows, some of them holding hands and embracing each other as they fell to a very brutal and very public death on the pavement below. In total, 146 workers died that day, while the owners of the factory, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, and some others, escaped onto the roof and jumped to neighboring buildings. Meanwhile, massive crowds gathered outside, watching in horror. The public was shocked by what transpired, and the fire sparked a larger movement that demanded better working conditions. The owners of the factory themselves were put on trial, but the defense successfully planted the seed of doubt in the jury with the issue of whether or not the stairwell door was locked. The defense also painted the young women who testified as unreliable and immature. The owners were subsequently acquitted. Despite this injustice, the events of that day left behind a legacy that spurned better working conditions and brought the government in to ensure that these working conditions were followed. This is the beginning of workplace safety that we might take for granted today. Unfortunately, like in so many cases, it just took a tragedy for action to be taken. After the tragic fire, public opinion on immigration began to change. Americans who had previously looked down on immigrants saw and heard about the horrific events of that day and began looking at immigrants with more sympathy. This shift in public perception led to bigger alliances. It also led to pivotal public image moments, such as the march on April 5, 1911, which was a symbolic burial for the women of the fire. This march also included hundreds of thousands who took the day to strike from their jobs and march along in solidarity with workers' rights. There were also great optics when Rose Schneiderman, a leader of the movement, was held up by others as they walked through heavy wind and rain, refusing to give up their fight. This was seen as an iconic moment that helped push the needle in favor of workers' rights. The initial reaction from many, such as the Red Cross, was to simply donate money to the victims' families. However, others like Rose Schneiderman insisted that more systematic change was needed. She, along with her allies, demanded a shifting culture of better working conditions as well as more public debate about the conditions within the workplace. This was a stark contrast to simply taking donations and going back to the status quo. As this issue continued to gain light in the public eye, numerous factions came together to make workers' rights more of a political issue, and New York was soon home to the most progressive safety codes in the United States. As a result of the fire, many immigrants found themselves bonding and joining together to form a more powerful voice within society. These immigrants began to identify simply as white, thus creating the white body politic, a much more unified movement with a much louder voice. This realization that these varying groups were stronger led to government realignment and helped fundamentally change the way the public perceived immigrants, especially white immigrant workers. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was vastly important in raising public awareness to the plight of workers. The imagery of the fire and the bodies jumping from the 9th floor massively raised public awareness as well as public sympathy, something necessary before real change could occur. Within a day after the fire, over 200,000 people had come to witness the carnage firsthand. The photographs and eyewitness accounts were enough for the government to shift its view of factories as private to public, thus demanding more accountability from factory owners. While the owners of the Triangle factory were acquitted of their role in the fire, future business owners would be forced to adhere to much stronger safety precautions. It is an unfortunate reality that tragedy is sometimes necessary to spark change, but that was the case with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Thankfully, the workers who died that day did not lose their lives in vain. Their deaths sparked new alliances amongst immigrants and raised social awareness, which led to vastly improved conditions. In today's workplace or public spaces, most of us take safety standard precautions for granted, but perhaps the next time you see a sprinkler in a warehouse or a fire door at the mall, remember the workers who died back in 1911 and be thankful you live in a day and age where safety is a standard of public life. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe. For more content, check out darkfictionfactory.com and more here on our Dark Fiction Factory YouTube channel. Until next time, stay safe and take care.